history at Springfield College in Charleston, South Carolina, and the author of 3 books. Now, most of us know that in the late 1890s, Jim Crow, the laws of segregation of blacks and whites, became pretty much the law of the land in the United States through Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court decision made in 1896. And throughout the southern states, you had these constitutional state conventions that made segregation and the denial of blacks' rights to vote the laws of the state. Here in the state of South Carolina, the man who led that effort was a man by the name of Benjamin Tillman, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But here's something that most people don't know. People did not wait until the 1950s and 60s to start fighting against this stuff. From the very beginning, you had people, black and white, in the United States who tried to stop Jim Crow before it started. And this is the story about several of them. Now, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, the man behind the efforts to bring segregation to the state of South Carolina was Benjamin Ryan Tillman, who is shown here in my book, in a page from my book, Voices of Black South Carolina, Legend and Legacy. Tillman was the man who, among the good things he did, he helped start Clemson University and Winthrop College. But, however, he tried to bring unity among white South Carolinians by denying African Americans the right to vote, and by keeping blacks in a subordinate position, he figured he could have more jobs for the state's poor whites. Very twisted plan, you see. Incidentally, his statue is also on the State House ground in Columbia. Go figure. Anyway, in the fall of 1895, Tillman held the South Carolina Constitutional Convention that was designed to deny blacks' rights to vote and make segregation the law of the state of South Carolina. The information I'm about to give you comes from the Columbia State and the Charleston News and Courier issues from the period of October through December 1895, if you want to go back and check on this stuff. Well, here's what a lot of people don't know. Many delegates from across the state of South Carolina went to this convention to basically vote for making segregation the law of the state and denying the African Americans' right to vote. But there were 6 very heroic individuals. There was Thomas Miller, who was the founder of South Carolina State College, who you'll hear about in a minute, William Whipper, Robert Anderson of Georgetown, James E. Wigg, Isaiah Reed, and also the great Robert Smalls, who was seen on the cover of this book, Legends and Legacy, Voices of Black South Carolina. Now, the thing about all of this is that those gentlemen I just mentioned were the 6 African Americans who did what they could to keep segregation from being the law of the state in South Carolina. They went to this convention in what turned out to be a vain but brave effort to put a stop to this legislation. Here's how things went. In October the 2nd, 1895, the great Robert Smalls, he was remembered for sailing in the boat, the Planter. He put his family aboard the boat during the Civil War when they were slaves, and he sailed them into freedom in Union waters. Robert Smalls was a congressman during Reconstruction, as well as a delegate to this convention. And on October the 2nd, 1895, according to the South Carolina State newspaper, which is published in Columbia, they had to make a vote on whether to make interracial marriages outlawed in South Carolina. So they passed a law that said that it would be illegal for black men to have white women as wives or to cohabit with them. Robert Smalls got up and said, "Well, gentlemen, I think that's a good idea. But at the same time, while we should make it illegal for black men to marry white women, let's make it illegal for white men to cohabit with black women." Well, in those days, you had a lot of wealthy white men who had black mistresses, practice going back through slavery. And needless to say, that caused a lot of consternation at the convention. And Benjamin Tillman was very embarrassed. But the law passed saying that it was illegal for white men also to cohabit with black women, but that law was very seldom enforced in the state of South Carolina. It was not until the Loving versus Virginia case in 1967 that such laws were struck down in the United States. Now, while all that was happening, the black delegates made bold speeches to prevent this terrible onslaught against the African Americans' rights from happening. William Whipper, who is the great-great-grandfather of Seth Whipper, who's now a representative from North Charleston. He got up and made some very bold speeches at the convention. He went on to say regarding their efforts to stamp out the rights of African Americans as follows. Get this, folks. The car of Negro progress is coming, and instead of allowing it to come on, you wish to stop it. You may just as well make up your minds that the Negro will rise. He will not be crushed. The Negro will rise sooner or later, crush us as you may. The Negro, with his perseverance and pluck, will and must come out. He cannot be kept down forever. It is not the nature of human affairs. Whoa. He also pressured the people of the convention to stop using the N-word so openly during the convention, I might add. Then you had the great Thomas Miller. Thomas Miller was the founder of what we now know as South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, South Carolina, one of the state's major HBCUs. And his speeches were so amazing that people came night after night to hear his great flights of oratory. Here's some of it. This is a white man's country, it is claimed, and I will not discuss that. But let me recall to you the words of the sainted Lincoln, you can fool all the people sometimes, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Oh, how long shall the South, through its short-sighted leaders, continue to legislate against principles for which our forefathers brought to this wilderness? It is useless to ask the ministers of the gospel to teach us the lesson the Nazarene, do unto others as would have them do unto you. For if they should come, we shall receive them not. But I do look toward the future with the hope of a better day for both races. That better day will only be at hand when we shall be taught that simple command, Father, let thy will be done, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. People got up and cheered all these wonderful speeches. Unfortunately, when the legislation came down to a vote, the legislature voted unanimously to bring segregation and the denial of African Americans' right to vote to South Carolina. However, it should be noted that along with those bold 6 African American representatives, you had 2 white representatives, T.E. Dudley out of Marlborough County and J. Halston Reed of Georgetown County, who voted against the legislation, saying that this was unwise, would open the door for fraud, and would be upset if tested in the United States Supreme Court. Well, along with this, when the time came to sign the document, Robert Small said that he would rather walk home to Beaufort County and refuse his pay rather than to sign such a document. Well, he didn't sign, but he still got paid, and it became law. And Benjamin Tillman and his men gathered around each other, said it would bring a ray of hope to white South Carolina, and they held hands and sang, God be with you until we meet again. Well, the unfortunate side effect of that was that for the next 60 years, South Carolina was a state that remained in segregation, and because they wasted money on separate facilities, the state continued to remain in poverty and backwardness until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. But the reason the story is so important is that people think that it wasn't until the 50s and 60s that African Americans and other people of goodwill started to stand up and demand that America live up to its constitutional values. Those battles have been going on since the beginning of this country, and they even tried to stop Jim Crow before it started. If you want to know more about this, read this chapter in my book, Voices of Black South Carolina, Legend and Legacy. This is Damon Fordham, Professor of History at Springfield College.